Okay, we'll start with a 1-minute introduction, and we'll have Mr. D'Antonio go first.
Thank you, ma'am. I appreciate that. Hello, everybody. My name is Mark D'Antonio, and I'm asking to be your next district attorney. What I want to do is take the district attorney's office in a new direction. Less politics, more independence, less cronyism. I feel that I have a diverse background which will help me do that. For 4 years, I served proudly in the United States Air Force. After that, I served as an FBI agent, concentrating in criminal law, foreign intelligence. After that, I was with the Department of Justice, where I helped implement policy with the Attorney General of the United States dealing with border security and crimes against women and children. In addition, for 10 years, right here in Las Cruces, I was a federal prosecutor, and I tried all types of cases, from kidnapping to public corruption. For the last 5 years, I've been a defense attorney and have my own law firm, and also did a little bit of family law. I'm asking you and the public to look at my diverse background and vote for me for your DA. Thank you.
Go ahead, Ms. Orlando.
Good evening, and thank you, League of Women Voters, and Bonnie. Thank you for having us tonight. I've been a prosecutor for 19 years here in Doña County, and for the past 2 years, I've had the privilege and the honor of serving as your district attorney. And in preparing for tonight's forum, I was thinking, why am I fighting, and why do I want to keep fighting so hard for this job? And then today happened in court. This morning at 8 o'clock, I started with a case where a woman was brutally killed and stabbed by her estranged husband in front of her children. And we were arguing motions and fighting for that woman that was passed away. Then this afternoon, we had a case where a criminal had killed his 6-month-old baby, and we were asking for the maximum sentence on that. And it made me think, this is why I do what I do every day, and this is why I want to continue to do what I do every day. As your district attorney for the past two years, we've had a conviction rate of 97%, and we've resolved 15 homicides. I have a team of 24 prosecutors behind me that fight every day for justice. I have the best victim advocates in the world that go to court and make sure that the victims understand what's going on. I'm asking for your support so that I can continue doing what I've been doing for the past 19 years, but especially for the past 2 years. Thank you.
Okay, our very first question here, we'll start with Ms. Orlando. Which of the constitutional victims' rights do you feel most important, and why?
Thank you. I think that's a very good question because often our victims' rights are ignored. I think probably the best victims' rights is the right to be heard. Sometimes we ignore their rights in court. We know that the accused always have a right. They have all of the rights. But victims have rights too. And we need to make sure that we listen to them, that the judges listen to them, that they hear them, and then that they take into consideration what their wishes are and what their desires are. Sometimes when we're in court, you find that, unfortunately the judges might already have their mind made up or are a little bit dismissive of the victims. And so I think listening to them and hearing them and knowing that they have just as many rights and they're just as important, it's a key part to our criminal system. Thank you.
Mr. D'Antonio.
A victim's right to be heard is of primary importance. However, I believe that this is being done very well in this county. We have good people, victim advocates, and judges who believe in the system, who believe that victims should have every right and every say in their prosecution. However, may I suggest that the most important thing you could do for a victim is stop them from being a victim. Now, if we concentrate not only on victim advocacy, but also a proactive approach to law enforcement, we can prevent some people from being victims. And isn't it better to prevent the crime before it happens instead of nursing a mother of a child who's been injured or hurt? So proactive investigation and law enforcement, in hand with victims' rights and advocacy, make a very hard and fast system.
Okay, we'll start with you, Mr. D'Antonio. Child abuse is a serious problem in Doña County. What programs to prevent or resolve the problem are in place now, or would you suggest?
Right now, there is no written, comprehensive strategy to handle child abuse. Now, what we need is a comprehensive plan with ever-shrinking budgets and people scrambling around. If we use social workers, hospitals, law enforcement, and use all the resources in a combined plan, the DA, as the #1 law enforcement officer in the county, has the lead responsibility to make that happen, to have a planned strategy. And ladies and gentlemen, I don't mean something that just the DA knows about. I mean a published plan, a strategy that says, here's how we're going to affect change, here's how we're going to protect the children of Doña County. Now, of course, a proactive plan can't stop all child abuse, unfortunately. That needs to be coupled with a hardcore plan to treat these people when they go to trial. Have a bona fide strategic prosecution plan, hand in hand, that will solve or help to solve the problem.
Ms. Orlando?
Thank you. While I wish that we could prevent child abuse and as a district attorney be out on the streets patrolling, that's not our job. We have law enforcement that does that, and we have the best law enforcement here in Doña County. And I've worked with partnering with them. I've been endorsed by every single law enforcement office that is in Doña County. But what we also have is we have community agencies that go out and work and educate the community. Our office also goes out and educates the community about the resources that we have. I just was one of the guest speakers along with Ms. Byers at, and I can't think of the title, but it's a company, it's an agency that's just been in effect for 2 years. They work with the mentally ill, the people that have children, and they go out and they try and help the community to prevent children from being victimized. We also have La Casa, we have Casas, we have the Child Crisis Center. So I think the more that we get out as district attorneys and make it known that we will prosecute you if you hurt a child, you will be held accountable. And then we also help to educate, that will make a big difference.
Okay, we're going to stay with the topic of children. There is a pilot program for child support. Is there enough data collected to determine if this program is effective? And if so, what solution does solutions does the data suggest? And you may not be aware of this, Mr. D'Antonio, but if you have a comment, please say so. We'll start with Ms. Orlando.
Thank you. We did just start partnering with Children, Youth, and Families Department and going after parents that are delinquent in their child's arrears and in child support. We have 15 cases that we are just starting to prosecute, so there is no data that we have to judge that, whether it's being effective or not. But what we do know is that if we can get the parents and have them be held accountable for their children, and again, these are parents that have the means to care for their children. These are parents that have been ordered to pay for their children. These are not parents that are having a hard time working and cannot afford it. These are parents that have been court-ordered by our judges to pay, and they're in their arrears millions of dollars. We know that if the kids can have their resources, have school clothes, have food on the table, they're going to be much more effective in school, and they're going to remain in school. We also have worked with the kindergarten and the elementary schools, kids, to keep them in school and keep them engaged and make sure that the parents have them at school and holding the parents accountable for when their children do not show up at school. All those things will help make the children be the prosperous ones, and after all, they are our future.
Let me be quite clear on this. Every parent has a moral and legal obligation to support their child. and there's nothing that can convince me of anything else. This is where diversity of experience comes into play. Having done domestic law for the last 5 or 6 years as part of my law practice, I can tell you with certainty that when you look at these situations, it takes integrity and compassion as well as a tough-minded stance on that. I have no problem and would encourage as much data collection as possible. Now, there may be some advocates who say, well, you know, the dad or mom has rights. Well, I say the child's rights are paramount. We have as a group, as other practitioners who do family law, that we always look at the best interest of the child. And that's what I would continue to do as the DA. I would be extremely tough on people who refuse to support their children. I have a 7-year-old. And I think of like children not being supported, it makes me angry. Thank you.
All right. This is really kind of an information question, and I'd be interested in the answer, too. Should all teachers be required by law to report any suspected child abuse, and is this the current law in New Mexico?
I think that teachers have a great responsibility to be on the front line and predetermine whether potential child abuse is happening. However, there are two sides to that. We have to have a specialized unit in the DA's office that deals with such kind of complaints, because we have to make sure that teachers aren't overstepping their bounds. But to accuse a teacher, when a teacher accuses a parent of potential child abuse, that sets a chain of events that cannot be recalled. So we have to have a specialized team that would be ready to handle these kind of issues, to counsel and to interrogate and to interview teachers who report potential child abuse. They can decide within their expertise whether to proceed to a criminal prosecution or whether to let it go as maybe a misdiagnosed event.
Okay, but is this the law? Is there a law in New Mexico about this?
I'm not aware of such a law, ma'am.
All right. Ms. Orlando?
Let me be very clear, because I go out and train on this. There is a law. It is mandatory that every single person that suspects child abuse report it. That is mandatory. It is a misdemeanor if you do not. If you have reasonable suspicion, you must report it. And our teachers and our principals and our social workers and the people that work with children are held to a higher standard because they come in contact with the children every day. So the law is that first you can report it to either Children, Youth, and Families. There's a SCI number, a 1-800 number. There also is the police department that you can call. But it is mandatory that you call. Once you call, then an investigation is started. Once the investigation starts, then whether you report it to Children, Youth, and Families, that information is shared with the police department. If you report it to the police department, that information is shared with Children, Youth, and Families Department. So it is mandatory. Everyone is protected as long as they have a reasonable suspicion that a child is being hurt and they are doing it under good faith.
Okay. Now we're going to move on to a new question. What steps should be taken in the DA's office to fight fraud, white-collar crime, and elder abuse? And we'll start with Ms. Orlando.
Thank you. We have some steps that we've started in the past 2 years under my direction, but we also are continuing them. We have a unit that works with elderly fraud. We have a contract that works with the county that goes out and educates the elderly to make sure that they know how to prevent check writing scams, what kind of pins to use so that the checks can't be washed and rewritten and their bank accounts emptied. We have a victim advocate that goes out and writes a newsletter to train those elderly people on how to avoid some of those elderly scams and the ID thefts. Moreover, last year, we had a prosecutor that was named the White-Collar Prosecutor of the Year for 2011, statewide from the Bar Association. Mike Heitz, he's the leader of our white-collar crimes. So he goes out and he trains. He has 2 other experienced attorneys that work under him. So every day, we are doing the job of fighting white-collar crime. It's a devastating crime to people. Even though you might not see the scars or the bruises, it's very devastating to try and get your identity back or to spend your life savings on some project and not have it returned. So we'll just continue to improve and fight on that every day.
I've talked to the people, the elderly in this community for the past few months. There is no active white-collar crime unit in the DA's office. The answer just given was a purely political response. I recently wrote an article on white-collar crime, and the answer by my opponent was almost verbatim. What we need here are dedicated people who are trained, specially trained, and that takes specialized techniques. White-collar crime is very devastating. There's no doubt about it. And if you talk to the folks in Las Cruces and Doña County who've been victims, they will happy to tell you that when they reported those crimes to the DA's office, they were stonewalled and told that they didn't have the expertise to handle it, and they were pushed aside. That's the reality of what's going on, folks.
This moves on to domestic violence. After prosecuting domestic violence cases, what steps do you suggest for reducing domestic violence? We'll start with you, Mr. Antonio.
Domestic violence requires, again, total and complete community involvement because the DA's office cannot do it alone. Let me get back to my point of proactive law enforcement. This is why diversity of experience is so important. Having been a law enforcement officer, having set national policy for issues, I understand that it takes strategic planning. There has to be a plan in place. Now, what I would suggest is getting all the local authorities who handle this type of matters together. We're talking about hospitals, social workers, the judiciary, and all such agencies to have a unified plan, folks. Right now, there is no unified plan. The DA's office, whoever heads that office, which is the DA, of course, should have leadership responsibility for putting a plan in place and encouraging others to join that plan. That's what needs to be done, and that's not what's being done now. We need a plan and teamwork to solve our problems.
Well, I think we can talk about plans and strategic plans all day long, but when you don't have state experience and you don't have the backing of law enforcement, it's not going to work. I have state experience for 19 years in this county. I have been endorsed by every law enforcement agency in Doña County, from Sunland Park to the Las Cruces Police Department to DASO to the FOP. We prosecute domestic violence cases every day. We have a misdemeanor prosecutor that does it full time. We have a felony level prosecutor, senior level prosecutor that does domestic violence cases every day. We work hand in hand with La Casa and the anger management program every day. We are out in the community talking and training and teaching about it. We are in the court prosecuting it. We are one of the only communities, and please look it up, but we are one of the, I think we're the first community that, and it's Judge Palomino, that made case law about using 911 calls and not having a victim. And we were successful and got a conviction. So I will tell you that in being proactive and being very responsive and being very tough on domestic violence cases, that's how we're going to make a change.
Okay, this is going to be the last question. Are you aware of or have you prosecuted any voter fraud cases? And if so, describe the circumstances. And we'll start with Ms. Orlando.
Yes, we are in the process right now of prosecuting individuals down in Sunland Park for voter fraud, along with other cases. We got calls from both Democrats and Republican senators and representatives that were concerned back in March when the election was going on for the mayor, and they said, can you do something about it? I put together a task force, and we went down and we started the investigation, and we now have over 22 people charged. We have had one person plea. So we are prosecuting it. We're prosecuting it. Some people say, well, you've only charged 4 people for voting wrongfully or for fraudulently casting votes. But I know that my dad was in the military. I was a military brat growing up, and I know he fought hard for our rights and the rights to vote. And so any vote that is taken away from an honest citizen and an honest vote is something that needs to be prosecuted and needs to be dealt with swiftly and quickly, because it makes a difference. It's our constitutional right, and it makes a difference.
Ma'am, I have not been involved in a voter fraud case, but I have done a great number of public corruption cases when I was the FBI agent in Washington, D.C. And I will tell you, from my experience, I would handle the Sunderland Park case much differently. When you have a public corruption case, it's very important that you do a stealth investigation, determine who the major players are and who are the real problems. And only once that determination is made through specialized investigative techniques do you do a takedown of all the interested parties in one fell swoop. This does two things. It prevents the people down the chain of line from changing the evidence during the investigation and trying to escape justice. It also prevents the people from having their government undermined. If everybody that you know is being arrested, politician, on a week-by-week basis, you have no confidence in your government. So as a DA, you're responsible for everybody. And there should be consideration to the people who are losing their faith in government. Now, these people need to be prosecuted down in Sunderland Park, but it needs to be done to a systematic, quick resolution.
Okay. This concludes our district attorney portion, and we'll give everyone a round of applause.